The sun bled orange across the Arizona horizon, casting jagged shadows over the cracked earth of San Viento, a border town so close to Mexico you could smell the mesquite smoke drifting north. Jack Callahan, a 68-year-old retired Marine Corps gunnery sergeant, eased his weathered Chevy Silverado down the dirt road that snaked toward the border. His hands, scarred from decades of service, gripped the wheel with the steady calm of a man who'd faced death in jungles and deserts but never flinched. In the bed of his truck, boxes of blankets, canned food, and school supplies rattled softly, bound for the Hogar de Los Angeles orphanage, just across the line in Sonora. The kids there called him T.O. Jack, Uncle Jack, a name that warmed the edges of his hardened heart. Jack had been making this run every Saturday for 7 years, ever since he'd hung up his uniform and settled into a modest ranch house on the outskirts of San Vieto. At 68, he was lean but unbowed, his silver hair cropped tight, his eyes sharp as the K-bar he still carried in his boot. His olive drab-filled jacket, the same one he'd worn in Iraq, bore a single patch, the eagle, globe, and anchor of the Marine Corps, stitched over his chest like a shield. It was more than fabric to Jack. It was a vow, a life, a creed. The border was a mile away, the road cutting through a narrow canyon flanked by red rock walls that seemed to lean in, whispering warnings. Jack's radio crackled with an old Merle Haggard tune, but his senses were tuned to the world outside. 30 years in the Corps had taught him to trust the prickle at the back of his neck, the one that said trouble was close. As the canyon darkened, that prickle turned to a hum. The roar came first. Low, guttural, like a pack of wolves waking up. Headlights sliced through the dusk, pinning Jack's truck in a blinding glare. 5 motorcycles rolled into view, their chrome glinting like bared teeth. The riders formed a wall across the road, engines snarling, their leather vests marked with a coiled rattlesnake and the words. Los Vaboras. Jack eased his foot off the gas, the Silverado rolling to a stop. His right hand drifted to the gear shift, his left resting lightly on the wheel, but his mind was already mapping the terrain. Exits, cover, threats. Old habits didn't die, they just waited. The lead rider swung off his bike, a wiry man with a shaved head and a spiderweb tattoo sprawling across his throat. His name, though Jack didn't know it yet, was Rico Salazar, a mid-level enforcer for Los Vaboras, a gang that ran meth and fear across the border. Rico's grin was all edges, his eyes glinting with the kind of cruelty that thrived in places where laws were just suggestions. Behind him, the other riders dismounted, their boots kicking up dust as they closed in, a pack of hyenas circling a lone buffalo. "Well, look at this," Rico drawled, his voice thick with mockery. "Old man thinks he's still in the land of the free." He spat into the dirt, his gaze locking on the American plates of Jack's truck. "Wrong side of the line, Grandpa." Jack's face didn't change. He stepped out of the truck, slow and deliberate, his boots crunching on the gravel. At 6'2", he stood taller than most, his posture ramrod straight, the kind that screamed discipline even in the face of a storm. "Just heading back to town," he said, his voice low, steady, like a man reading the weather report before a hurricane. Rico circled closer, his boots scuffing the dirt, his eyes narrowing at the Marine Corps patch on Jack's jacket. "That yours?" he asked, jerking his chin at the eagle, globe, and anchor. "You earned that, or you just playing dress-up?" "Every stitch," Jack replied, his tone flat but unyielding. The air thickened, the other bikers shifting closer, their hands twitching near knives and chains tucked into their belts. The smell of stale beer and something sharper, maybe amphetamines, hung heavy around them. A younger biker, barely 25, with a shaved scalp and eyes like black ice, stepped forward. "Wrong country, old-timer, wrong jacket." His fist came fast, a sucker punch aimed at Jack's gut. It landed hard, the kind of blow that would have doubled over a lesser man. Jack didn't flinch. His breath hitched, but his eyes stayed locked on the kid, unblinking, like he was memorizing his face for later. The others laughed, a harsh, barking sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Rico joined in, his fist slamming into Jack's shoulder, then his ribs. Each hit a calculated insult. You think you're tough, Marine? Rico sneered, grabbing Jack's collar and yanking him forward. This ain't Baghdad. Ain't nobody coming for you. The blows came faster now, a flurry of knuckles and boots. One caught Jack's cheek, splitting the skin, blood trickling warm down his jaw. Another drove into his side, where old shrapnel scars ached under the strain. Through it all, Jack didn't fight back. He didn't beg. He didn't even grunt. His right hand stayed clamped over the Marine Corps patch, fingers curled tight, as if shielding it from the violence. As if it was the only thing worth saving. His knees hit the dirt, but his spine stayed straight, his eyes never leaving Rico's. Pathetic, Rico spat, stepping back as the others took their turns. A boot caught Jack's thigh, another grazed his temple. The gang's laughter grew wilder, fueled by the thrill of breaking something they didn't understand. Stay north next time, old man, Rico said, wiping his knuckles on his vest, or we'll bury you in this canyon. The bikes roared back to life, their tail lights fading into a cloud of dust that swallowed the road. Jack knelt alone in the dark, blood pooling in the dirt beneath him, his breath ragged but steady. The canyon was silent now, save for the faint whistle of the wind. He pressed his hand harder against the patch, feeling the embroidered eagle under his palm. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a promise, one he'd made decades ago, one that hadn't expired. In the distance, a coyote howled, sharp and mournful. Jack's lips twitched, not quite a smile. He didn't know if Los Viboras would ever understand what they'd just started, but he did. Somewhere, deep in his bones, he felt it. A signal sent, a debt called in. The night wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The stars burned cold above the San Viento Canyon, their light barely touching the blood-streaked dirt where Jack Callahan knelt. His breath came in shallow rasps, each one a knife in his cracked ribs, but his hand stayed firm over the Marine Corps patch, the eagle's wings warm under his palm. In the silence, Jack reached into his boot, fingers trembling, not from pain, but from purpose. Tucked against his ankle was a small black device, no bigger than a pack of cigarettes, its surface worn smooth by years of waiting. The FQ signal. A relic from a life he'd buried, a promise he'd never broken. His thumb found the single button, pressed it once, hard. A faint red light pulsed, then died. The signal was sent. Somewhere, someone was listening. Jack staggered to his feet, the world tilting as blood dripped from his split cheek. He didn't know how long it would take, or if the old oath still held, but he knew one thing: Los Vibras had crossed a line, and in the world of men like Jack, lines like that were drawn in blood and honor. He climbed back into his Silverado, the engine coughing to life, and drove north towards San Viento, the orphanage's tortillas still tucked in his jacket, now stained with his own blood. 2 days later, dawn broke over a dusty farm just outside town. Elena Morales, a widow who'd known Jack since he first started his runs to Hogard to Los Angeles, found him slumped on her porch, his face a map of bruises, his left eye swollen shut. "Dios mío, tío Jack," she gasped, rushing to his side. "Who did this?" Jack's good eye met hers, steady but distant, like a man staring through time. "Just need water, Elena, and a phone." She helped him inside, her hands shaking as she cleaned his wounds with a damp cloth. His ribs were purple, his breathing uneven, but he refused her pleas to call a doctor. "No hospital," he said, his voice a low growl. "They'll ask questions I can't answer." Elena watched, helpless, as Jack limped to her landline and dialed a number from memory. When the line connected, he spoke 4 words, each one deliberate. "Viper, Baja, target active." Then he hung up, his hand lingering on the receiver as if it carried the weight of a grenade. Elena's eyes widened. "Jack, you must tell the police, Las Viboras. They're monsters. They take girls, run drugs." "The cops won't touch them." Jack shook his head, wincing as he eased into a chair. "Cops can't fix this," he said. "Some things need a different kind of justice." What Jack didn't tell her was that the FQ signal wasn't just a beacon, it was a call to arms. A whisper to ghosts who'd sworn an oath in a jungle half a world away. In 1983, during a classified op in Central America, Jack's unit had been ambushed, half their squad left bleeding in the dirt. The survivors, 5 men, bound by loss. Made a pact, no brother left behind, no debt unpaid. They called themselves the Fox, a name whispered in fear by enemies who never saw them coming. The Pentagon buried their records, but the Fox never disbanded. They just faded into the shadows, waiting for a signal like the one Jack had sent. At 3:17 a.m. on the third day, a warehouse in Yuma flickered to life. Inside, 4 men moved with the silent precision of a unit that hadn't forgotten its rhythm. Daniel Doc Carter, 65, a former Navy corpsman, packed trauma kits with hands that still remembered battlefield triage. Ethan Brooks, 67, a comm specialist with a limp from a grenade in Fallujah, tuned encrypted radios to a frequency dormant since the Cold War. Nathan Hayes, 60, the youngest, checked a suspension on 4 unmarked Jeeps, their matte black paint swallowing the light. And Colonel Samuel Reed, 70, the last of the Fox's original commanders, pored over satellite maps of a compound 12 miles south of Nogales, his red pencil marking entry points with surgical intent. No words were spoken. None were needed. The 5th man, Jack, was the spark. They were the fire. The Jeeps crossed the border at 4:02 a.m., slipping through a forgotten checkpoint known only to those with clearance higher than most generals. Federal alarms pinged in a D.C. basement, only to be silenced by a single keystroke from someone who knew the Fox's name. The convoy moved without headlights, guided by starlight and GPS fed from Jack's signal. By 5:30 a.m., they were perched on a ridge overlooking the Viboris's compound, a ramshackle fortress of cinder block and barbed wire, motorcycles parked like trophies out front. Music pulsed from within, a drunken anthem to a gang that thought itself untouchable. Armed men patrolled, their steps lazy, rifles slung low. 30, maybe 40. Doc whispered, his binoculars catching the glint of a guard's AK-47. Sloppy, but armed to the teeth. Colonel Reed's eyes narrowed, his voice a low rumble. They hit one of ours. Sloppy's their mistake. He gave a single nod. Phase 1. Silence. The Fox moved like ghosts, their steps silent on the desert floor. No gunfire, no chaos, just precision. Ethan's radio jammer cut the compound's comms, a hiss of static swallowing their calls. Nathan's wire cutters snipped fuel lines on every bike, rendering them useless. Doc's tranquilizer darts dropped guards before they could scream, their bodies slumped in the dirt like discarded puppets. And Reed, the old lion, moved through the armory, disarming traps and emptying crates of weapons with a speed that belied his age. They didn't spill blood. They didn't need to. The Fox's justice was surgical, a message carved in silence. In the main room, where Los Viboras had celebrated their attack on Jack, the Fox left their mark. A single boot print, pressed into a puddle of spilled tequila, deliberate and unmissable. Atop it, a Marine Corps challenge coin gleamed under the flickering lights, one side bearing the eagle, globe, and anchor, the other etched with a fox silhouette and the words, Semper Vigilance. Always watchful. The coin wasn't just a token, it was a warning, a promise that the Fox, by dawn, the compound was a ghost town. Motorcycles gutted, weapons gone, hard drives wiped, cell phones smashed. The Viboras who hadn't fled were bound and left for the Federales, their bravado shattered. The Fox vanished as they'd come, their jeeps melting into the desert, leaving only whispers in their wake. Back at Hogar de Los Angeles, Jack sat on the orphanage porch, his ribs bandaged, a wooden cross he'd carved for the kids clutched in his hands. The children played nearby, their laughter a fragile shield against the world's cruelty. Elena approached, her eyes red from sleepless worry. Jack, the radio says Los Viboras are gone. Just gone. They say men came in the night like angels of vengeance. Her voice broke, tears spilling. Was that you? Jack's gaze drifted south toward the border. Not me, he said softly. Family. A single jeep crested the horizon, stopping at the orphanage gate. A man stepped out. Colonel Reed, his silver hair catching the sunrise, a scar tracing his jaw like a battle map. He didn't approach, just stood at attention and saluted, crisp and unwavering. Jack returned it, his bandaged hand trembling not from pain but from the weight of brotherhood. The kids fell silent, watching, sensing something bigger than they could name. As the Jeep vanished into the dust, 9-year-old Sophia tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Tio Jack, who was that?" Her eyes were wide, searching. Jack's voice caught, a rare crack in his armor. "Just an old friend, mija, from a time when we promised to never leave each other behind." That night, as Jack drove back to San Viento, the radio crackled with news. Los Vibras leaders had turned themselves in, babbling about ghosts in the desert. Jack's eyes glistened, not from the pain in his ribs, but from the knowledge that the fox had answered. For every bruise on his body, for every child at the orphanage who'd ever known fear, the fox had struck back. And in that moment, under the Arizona stars, Jack Callahan knew he wasn't alone. Some hosts never died, some brothers never left. The desert sun rose over San Viento, painting the horizon in hues of fire and gold. But for Jack Callahan, the light felt heavier today. His ribs still ached from the beating Los Vibras had dealt him 3 days ago, but he sat on the porch of Hogar de Los Angeles, whittling a wooden dove for little Sophia, his hands steady despite the bruises. The orphanage buzzed with life, children's laughter mingling with the clatter of pots as Elena Morales prepared breakfast. Yet the air carried a new weight, a quiet reverence that hadn't been there before. Word of the night Los Vivaras vanished had spread like wildfire across the border, and with it, whispers of men who moved like shadows, leaving only a Marine Corps coin and a boot print in their wake. Jack's Silverado, parked by the gate, bore new scratches from the canyon ambush, but he hadn't missed a single run to the orphanage. The kids needed him. Tio Jack, the gruff American who taught them to tie knots and sing Sweet Caroline off-key. Today, though, their eyes held something more than affection. 10-year-old Mateo, who'd once flinched at loud noises, stood taller when Jack passed, mimicking the Marine's squared shoulders. Elena, too, watched him with a mix of awe and worry, her hands twisting a dishcloth as she approached. "Tio Jack," she said softly, "the village is talking. They say Los Viboras are gone." 17 men walked into Nogales police stations yesterday confessing to everything. Drugs, kidnappings, worse. 9 others they say they fled to Guatemala. The rest... She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Just gone." Jack's knife paused mid-carve, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Good riddance," he said, his voice low but firm, betraying nothing of the storm inside. He didn't tell her about the FQ signal, the call that had summoned the Fox Squad, his brothers from a life of blood and oaths. He didn't tell her how in the hours after the signal, he'd felt their presence, like a pulse in the desert night, answering a debt older than most of these kids' parents. Across the border, the fallout was seismic. In Nogales, police stations buzzed with chaos as Los Viboras lieutenants, pale and shaken, spilled secrets they'd sworn to die for. "It wasn't us," one muttered to a skeptical officer, his hands cuffed. "Men came, no faces, no sound, just ghosts." The officer scoffed, but the fear in the man's eyes was real. By noon, the Federales had raided the Viboras compound, finding only silence. Motorcycles gutted, weapons vanished, and that single boot print in spilled tequila. The Marine Corps coin gleaming like a judge's gavel. The story hit the airwaves, a Tijuana radio host calling it "the night the desert fought back." In San Viento, locals began leaving gifts at Jack's ranch house. Hand-woven bracelets, jars of homemade salsa, a child's drawing of a fox under a starry sky, not payment but respect. Jack felt the shift everywhere. At the border checkpoint, guards who once eyed his American plates with suspicion now waved him through, their hands lingering near their caps in half salutes. In the village, men removed their hats when he passed, and women pressed rosaries into his hands, murmuring blessings. Even Officer Vargas, a grizzled cop who'd once questioned Jack's frequent border runs, now nodded silently, his eyes averted, as if he knew something he couldn't say. The community didn't just see Jack anymore. They saw a man who'd stood against monsters and won, even if they didn't know how. But Jack wasn't here for glory. He was here for the kids, for the promise he'd made to himself when he left the Corps, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Every Saturday he loaded his truck with supplies, drove the dusty road to Hogar de los Angeles, and sat with the children, teaching them words like hope and courage. Today, as he handed Sophia the finished dove, her small fingers traced the wood, her eyes bright with trust. "Now, Jack," she asked, "are you a hero?" Jack's throat tightened, the weight of her question heavier than any punch he'd taken. "No, mija," he said, his voice rough. "Just a man who keeps his word." That evening, as the sun dipped low, Jack prepared to head home. Elena handed him a newspaper, its headlines screaming, "Vibora's collapse, gang leaders surrender, others vanish." She crossed herself, her voice trembling. "God sent angels, Jack." "I know it." Jack folded the paper, his eyes distant. "Sometimes, ma'am, he sends Marines." He drove back to San Viento under a sky bruised purple, the weight of the past week settling into his bones. At his ranch house, a small adobe with a sagging porch, he found a package waiting. No label, no note, just a plain box. Heavier than it looked. Inside was a Marine Corps dress uniform, pristine, with gunnery sergeant stripes sewn perfect and true. Pinned to the chest was a badge he'd never seen, a silver fox head, its eyes sharp as blades, encircled by 5 stars. It wasn't regulation, wasn't official, but it fit, like it was made for him, as if someone had measured his soul. Jack held it up, the fabric catching the porch light, and for the first time in days his eyes burned with unshed tears. Not for the pain, not for the fight, but for the brothers who'd answered his call, who'd reminded him that some bonds outlast time. He slipped the uniform on, the weight of it grounding him. Standing on his porch facing south toward the border, Jack felt the desert hum with something alive, something watchful. Across San Viento, porch lights flickered 3 quick pulses, a signal that had started appearing since the Viboras fell. Jack's own light joined them, a silent vow renewed. Then a sound, a low rumble, not a motorcycle, but something heavier. Headlights pierced the dusk, a single Jeep pulling up to his gate. The driver didn't step out, didn't speak. Just a silhouette, broad shoulders and a military haircut, raising a hand in a slow salute. Jack returned it, his heart pounding, not with fear, but with recognition. The Jeep lingered a moment, then turned, vanishing into the night. But as it did, Jack saw something in the dust. A faint outline. 5 figures standing against the horizon, their faces blurred, but their stance unmistakable. The Fox Squad. Not gone, not disbanded, but waiting. Always waiting. The next morning, a new rumor swept the border. A drug shipment abandoned in the desert, its smugglers gone without a trace. At the checkpoint, a grizzled veteran whispered, "Fox sends regards," to the guard, who waved him through without a word. In D.C., a classified file marked Operation Shadow Fox was sealed with a clearance level so high it didn't officially exist. And in San Viento, Jack's mailbox bore a new sticker beside his faded Marine decal. "We don't call 911. We call Fox." As Jack drove to the orphanage the next Saturday, a child's beaded bracelet hung from his rearview mirror, swaying with the rhythm of the road. The kids greeted him with cheers, but Sophia ran to him, slipping a drawing into his hand, a fox with 5 stars above it labeled Familia. Jack's eyes stung again, but he smiled, tucking the drawing into his jacket next to the silver fox badge. The desert stretched wide before him, vast and unforgiving, but it didn't feel empty anymore. Somewhere out there his brothers were watching, their oath unbroken, their signal ready, and as the sun set, casting long shadows toward Mexico, Jack knew one thing: the fox never slept. Not when a brother called, not when justice waited. The rumble came again that night, fainter but closer.